Maybe that's a good place to start out. I love being a moderator. I always get asked questions these days, so now I can ask some of the questions. But I'd love to ask your perspective on nuclear energy from maybe either the time you got into it or particularly the last 5 years, where we can talk about it wasn't justifiable to even run an operating nuclear plant. It was time to turn them off, and how different it's been. So, any reflections?
I thought we were going to kick up the energy in here. This is the most depressing question you could have asked me, but I do think it's important to mention, because I don't know that this dynamic sort of made its way down to Texas. The 2 dual unit sites down here have always been relatively healthy from an economic perspective, but that was not the case in the rest of the country. So I'll take you back to about 3 years ago. It was September 15th. We have a dual unit site called Barrón Station in Ogle County, Illinois. It's 2,300 megawatts, runs beautifully, and it was day 1 of our refueling outage. And that day, we did not know if we were going to put the fuel in the reactor or if we were going to leave it on the truck and let it go to one of our other sites, because we had announced retirement. The state legislature, which had considered a bill to support the site, had failed to reach consensus at the end of the legislative session in May. They came back in the summer, failed to reach consensus. And they knew the date was September 15th. That was the date we were turning it off and turning back the license, or we were putting the fuel in the reactor. And that's the day the House voted to approve the bill that would save that plant and 2 other dual unit sites that were on the verge of retiring. And I think if you ask anybody in the state of Illinois, they're thrilled that they did that, because now they have, there's an article recently about how Northern Illinois is the ideal place to put new large loads. They have 10 gigawatts of zero carbon around the clock power, and they have an energy surplus. And that is something that is very rare in America these days. But it's because the state chose to support the sites. And that led to work that we had done in other states to prevent retirements there. In all, 12 reactors have shut down elsewhere in the country since 2012, and 16 other reactors would have shut down but for those state programs. Then ultimately, a credit for existing nuclear was included in the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. That credit does expire in 2032, unlike some of the renewable credits that sort of go on and on and on. So we'll see. I think it was definitely a sea change for the industry and a good sign for the existing reactors that they had at least that 9-year lifeline. But there's no possible way I could have imagined 3 years ago that I'd be sitting here today listening to leaders like Dow talk about signing a contract with X Energy, and listen to NuScale, and listen to Oklo, and there's all GE's here, Blue Energy's here. All these other reactor firms that have this bright future in front of them. It's really great.
Yes, that really is amazing to me that economics shifted that much. And if we were going to put it on one thing, what would it be? Yeah.
Well, I think you could hear from what I just said, it's policy. Policy matters. The reason that this fleet was struggling, again, outside of Texas, wasn't because it wasn't working really hard to lower its cost. It was. And really hard to increase its efficiency. It was. But it was operating in a competitive market where you have, this sort of weird dichotomy between resources. Zero carbon resources over here that receive very significant state and federal support. Mm-hmm. Nuclear did not receive that support. And then conventional resources over here, that unlike nuclear, they don't have responsibility to cover the cost of controlling their waste and keeping it in a safe place. So we were sort of stuck in between those 2 worlds, and that wasn't really fair competition. I think everyone appreciated that, but it wasn't sort of clear what to do about it. Ultimately, between the state and the federal support, that has been resolved. But I think the exciting part about what we're hearing today and what we're seeing in the states where we operate, we have owner-operate 25 reactors in 6 states, is corporate customers stepping up, just as they did over the last several decades, to support new wind and new solar, to support existing reactors by signing long-term contracts, and to support new reactors as well. So that corporate component is a big factor, but that wasn't the sea change over the last 3 years. The sea change over the last 3 years is definitely policy.
That's very clarifying. The difference between opening 3 Mile Island has a large part to do publicly that we can discuss. The agreement with Microsoft and their agreement to pay a premium for carbon-free energy. And has that rewrote the price? We know that at least the public speculations at over $100 a megawatt hour in that market is doable. What merchant markets is that also available? Do you think you could directly apply that to Texas and we'd find off-takers who would come up with the same type of prices?
Yeah, so we haven't disclosed the price, but
I was pure speculation.
There's been lots of speculation.
I read that online. Thank you, Mark.
No, and I think there's a lot of lessons to come from the 3 Mile Island situation. That station is a dual unit. The undamaged reactor was a single unit site in Pennsylvania that had been operating extremely well since the accident in the 70s, but was even more challenged than our stations in Illinois due to it being a single unit site, 835 megawatts, a lot of costs spread over a few number of megawatt hours. And it was challenged, and the state legislature knew it was challenged, and there was a very valiant effort to try to get some support at the state level. The community rallied around the station, but that effort was no match for the sort of natural gas interests in Pennsylvania that were very much opposed to any kind of support for the plant. So it's this gorgeous sunny day in 2019 at noontime. I was on the roof of our building in Washington watching the US Capitol grounds at a big climate rally that was going on at the exact moment that the plant shut off for the last time. And one of those low points in your career that, it was just a failure. It was just terrible. And so while we're so happy to be turning it back on, and it is absolutely a success story for Microsoft and for the community and for nuclear, it is really a shame that it shut down, because 5 years of avoided emissions lost, 5 years of people not having the jobs that they had, the town, the community not having the economic investment that it had from this site. So we're super happy that when we did the technical evaluation of what it would take to turn it back on, it really wasn't going to be any major there wasn't going to be any major challenge. Like many of our sites, every 2 years we turn them off to do regular maintenance. But that station, we had replaced the steam generator in 2009. We had replaced the main power generator a decade ago. We do have to replace 2 main power transformers, but we have them on order and they're coming in 2026. So we don't have to pour any concrete, we don't have to tie any rebar, we don't have to pull any cable. We can turn that thing back on in 2027, and it's because we have a customer that was willing to sign a long-term contract to cover both the cost of that investment, of the capital work that we need to do to turn it back on, and then the ongoing delta between market prices and what it costs to run it. So we're, at the moment, really the biggest challenge is the people. Those of you who are familiar with conventional nuclear power know that you can't just sort of jump from reactor to reactor. It's an 18-month training cycle to get licensed to operate a plant. So we had to open up a class, we have to take applications, and we have to train folks all over again so that they can be ready to operate the reactor when we turn it on and meet our commitment to Microsoft.
It seems simple when I read about it in the newspaper. I was like, just turn it back on. But that's great that economically you can make the justification in today's world that you couldn't 5 years ago, underwritten by policy changes, including the production tax credit and the carbon-free premium that industrial off-takers are going to make. From the newspaper stories I've read, no inside information around $1.6 billion, or maybe that is a public LPO loan. That makes a ton of sense, right? If you could put 1.6 billion and get 800 something megawatts, it makes sense to everybody. How far can we extend this math to new build? Because that's the $1 billion question, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to see how you could extend the math to new build. I think the harder part is what is the new build going to cost? And so I think that's what our community is grappling with right now, is sort of getting, you've heard a lot about this already, getting over that first of a kind hump for each of these technologies so that we can say to a corporate customer, this is what it's going to cost. This is your obligation on a dollar per megawatt hour basis. And we have to get further down the cost curve on the new reactors for that to happen. But I mean, the appetite is there, not just on the corporate customer side. I mean, if you think about what the East Coast states are doing, signing long-term contracts with offshore wind developers at $150 a megawatt hour, $160 a megawatt hour, and they're over budget, and they're not on time, and states are still happy to do that. I think, we sort of need to get some of that swagger in this room here. Like, we have a superior product, and when we get to that point when we can offer a fixed price to a customer, we will have takers.
That's, the cost certainty when I've talked to utilities is like the number one deciding factor. You have things that could de-risk that, like the investment tax credit. Hearing, as Brett Rampol said, and many others, we can't lose ground on things that are in policy work with these huge projects. If there's even a hint of this going away, that could stop new development. So that's one positive thing that could help. Let's say, in my perspective, relatively newcomer, beginner's mind, I've had the thought that rebuilding existing reactors that have been built before could help, even though the capital costs are way higher. What do you think? Is that what do we need to do to get to cost certainty?
Well, I have to agree with you first, before I get to that question, on the importance of the 48E investment tax credit. I mean, when there was discussion this morning about what is the one thing you want Washington to do, and no one said, don't get rid of that credit, I wanted to stand up and scream. It's super important, and it did come out through later in the day, both that and the 45Y credit, production tax credit for nuclear. They have to stay in the code. That is absolutely essential. And as to, rebuilding shut down reactors, I mean, I think we've seen that happening in Michigan. We've seen that happen in Pennsylvania. And NextEra has said that they are looking closely at that at the Duane Arnold site. I don't think there are other sites that can get turned back on in the same way. If your question is whether there are places in the country where maybe nuclear construction had started and could get, could continue, I imagine there are places like that. There aren't any of those in our fleet, but I do think those probably exist. I think in the short term, though, the next best opportunity to get new megawatts on the grid in the shortest possible time is this uprate potential. And we've already announced 150 or so megawatts at 2 of our sites in Illinois, about $800 million investment, that we can get more megawatts off the existing footprint. We have about 1,000 megawatts, we think, across the rest of our fleet where we could do the same thing. That's a whole new AP 1000. And that obviously is at a far lower cost than building new. So those are the things we should be doing in the short term, and I think will happen. Obviously, you wouldn't let me sit up here and not expect me to say relicensing the sites is an absolutely essential thing to do. These plants can run to 80 years and probably longer, and so ensuring that they have a path towards second license extension, second license renewal is really, again, from an industry perspective, so important. We have to keep the leadership that the U.S. has in nuclear technology, especially as we have this very dramatic build going on in China and Russia and other places, to maintain the U.S. leadership for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which is like the non-proliferation reason. But the opportunity for this technology, this has been an amazing day. There is just so much enthusiasm, and to see that report come out this morning, and making sure all of our states saw it. Like, look at what Texas is doing, and because I agree completely with what Christine from NEI said. This needs to be a U.S. win, not a state win, but jealousy is a good thing, and have everyone see what Texas is doing is very good for the industry.
Summarize the do not shut down plants, right? Don't shut down Diablo. Restart them, uprate, and work our way back towards building? That's the big question. I want to keep on that until we get a justification. What's it like being in a company like Constellation and trying to make that case that you got to restart justified and trying to put it together to do a new build for, let's say, $10-20 billion? What does it take internally? And what could people outside of the company do to help? I mean, we have the policy levers, but walk us through that bet.
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question. I mean, look.
Billion, who's counting?
Yeah, billion. We all know no one's ever built a nuclear plant in a competitive market.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's a good point. It was mentioned, and you mentioned it.
So, and I think Jim Burke at Vistra sort of hit at this a little bit. Like, that's a challenge from an investor perspective when you have, call it 8 years of outlay before you have any revenues. But we've been talking all day about all the tools that are available, both at the federal level and that are on deck here in Texas. We have states that have the appetite, hopefully ginning up some more of that interest with the report today. And we have corporate customers. So, I think a combination of those sources, in addition to some independent equity that will come to these projects if we can get some going. For us, our immediate focus is really our sites. We 100% agree that the most sensible place to put new reactors is on sites that already host them. We have the support of the community. We have water. We have security. We have an interconnection. I mean, we have, in most cases, an enormous land buffer. So we've been trying to evaluate where are the sites in our fleet that are best suited.
Any in Texas?
Well, we have, it was mentioned this morning that both the Texas sites are suitable, but in that they have a lot of land. But we're a minority owner in the plant down here. But so that's really the first step is like, what is licensing that needs to happen to get the site ready for the NRC to say you can get to the next point of putting getting a construction and operating license on the site. And, a combination of all these factors that we've talked about, I think are going to lead to that being possible.
Yeah, that's great. One thing I've been doing and talking to utilities is kind of struck at like how broken the purchasing a nuclear power plant traditionally has been that got companies pretty gun shy where, one company takes all the risk traditionally, which is the utility. And if there's any price overruns, you eat the cost and you don't know how much it costs. And then in the regulated market, you pass it on to the ratepayers. And that has not resulted in a lot of building. It's my opinion that having more risk sharing for the parties at the earliest stage is the way to get around that. Have you seen any parts of that working or that being a better model?
No, I think there have been a lot of discussion of that already today, and that is absolutely going to be necessary. I think you have a lot of people in this room trying to figure out exactly how to make that work, and we're in that soup with everyone else. But that's going to have to be the model.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Do you have any questions for me? I don't.
How'd you get interested in nuclear, Charles?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kathleen. But I say this a lot on stage and stuff. My affiliation with nuclear was, in the family we viewed it as a weapons problem, and I was kind of brought up with the idea that I had some responsibility to take care of the nuclear weapons problem, which is a pretty heavy thing, and I didn't always deal with it in my life. And my association with nuclear energy was just ignorance. I thought, oh, it's probably bad. I don't know anything about it, vaguely negative. And so a few years ago when I started saying, can we actually really solve climate problems, do something at industrial scale, what is nuclear energy situation? And I looked into it. I was so shocked at how far off my perceptions were. Then it just easily verified by podcasts and basic data of how many people it had killed, that kind of radicalized me. And I want to represent that as a way that many people need to be reached that way once they hear the power of it. I wonder if that matches your experience, or were you for it, against it?
I don't think I had a view. I mean, I'm curious, like, in high school, how many people thought they were going to be in nuclear as a career?
Who's still in high school?
So maybe 10 hands. Like, we all sort of find our way into this space, and then we realize how unbelievably cool it is. I mean, I came in 2010 when I joined the predecessor to Constellation. I was in the government, and the writing was on the wall that, like, power prices were so low. Like, you could just see in our long-range plan that we were headed for a whole lot of pain. And, you know, I'm doing the policy work, and they're like, can you come up with a way to save the nuclear plants? I'm like, what are you talking about? This is crazy. But we had a great team. The guy who hired me is our current CEO, who was running the policy team at the time. And we tried all kinds of things. We even thought about hydrogen. This is like back in 2012. But you come to realize that this is such an essential commodity, and no one even knows about it. They don't know 20% of the country is fueled by nuclear energy. They don't realize that you can make 2,300 megawatts on a 1 square mile piece of land.
My Uber driver on the way out of the airport said, do we have any nuclear plants in the US? Which is a fair question. I mean, it's better than the opposite of I hate that stuff. So yeah, that's the level, and you at Constellation, of course, have had a role in advocating it now, advertising for it. That's changed. That didn't happen. I got involved publicly in the industry a few years ago, and it's just been straight up. Like, it's amazing timing, right? And we're having a moment, but I think maybe the question is, what can people from outside a utility, especially the nonprofit and philanthropic sector, community engagement, do to help the mission from Constellation's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I thought
from your personal perspective.
The panel that we had earlier with the sort of influencer group, I think, you know, they hit that on the head, like, in terms of, like, being comfortable, being loud and proud about the technology, and having it be something that, you know, you're actively working at in your state capitals. You know, you came into it when we were on the upswing, but there's a lot of years when we were going like this, and we got a lot of gray hair from all of those really tough days. But we had to start being louder about what we're doing. It was just something no one even knew about. And until you do that, you know, you run the risk that you end up on the wrong end of that prioritization process in the state capitals. And we just can't let that happen again.
Yeah, I think it is an amazing time to be accepting, vocal, you know, press for the interests of the industry that it really has not done in the past. So great timing. Reminds me of when I got into software in 1997, and it was like this wave coming. You could feel the internet happening, and my first boss said, you know, when you feel this kind of wave in business, you just ride it. And that's where we're at, folks.
My first boss told me on my first day that my job, which was, I was an energy regulatory lawyer, would be obsolete in 10 years. I flew here from Silicon Valley. I've been out in California all week. And when someone hears that I'm in the power business and I used to be a regulator, they won't shut up. Yeah. They won't leave me alone. Like, this is the thing. This is the bottleneck for this industry. And so we're relevant again.
Great. I don't know where we are on timing, so we could either take a question or shut it down. What do you think?
I don't know how we are on timing.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? We got one over here.
We've got one in the back, yeah.
Yeah, I think I heard Isabel say that that it doesn't Diablo doesn't actually have a license for the other 4 reactors, but potentially 4 other reactors had been planned. So the point is, they could seek a early site permit or a combined operating license permit from the NRC to put those reactors there. I very much hope they do. They right now have a 5-year lifeline from the California legislature, so they need to get that up to 20, and then work on putting more reactors on the ground. 3 Mile Island is actually an island that's 3 miles. There is no space on that site for additional reactors. But as I mentioned, we own or operate 25 reactors across the U.S. And so I'd say there's maybe a half dozen of our sites where we either had an early site permit, or we could easily sort of get an early site permit because there is sufficient land and infrastructure to build out additional reactors on the sites. Obviously, it depends on whether you're talking about, an AP1000 or you're talking about some, 2 or 4 pack of SMRs. But in general, there is absolutely that potential. And I think someone this morning mentioned the DOE report suggesting that there's enough 60 gigawatts across the U.S. fleet of additional capacity. We own about a quarter of the U.S. fleet, so I think you can extrapolate from that there is a lot of potential out there.
In Texas, being specific, right off the NRC website, there was the 2 main sites, Comanche and STP, both had 2-unit reactors licensed and pretty far along, and so that logic dictates that those would be the fastest place to start building now, and that's just in this one state of Texas, and we have
2 additional reactors.
Yeah,
at each
2
site.
at each where significant licensing started, and so that we all want to get a project going in the U.S. before we lose our mojo, and so that's always kind of top of the priority heap, right? Still open.
We got one more question.
Yes.
I can ask a non-Texas-centric question, but
That's not allowed, sorry.
is Constellation doing anything to fight against Pritzker's ban on big reactors and try and put maybe another reactor at Clinton? Clinton's just a single-unit site. They could use another one.
That's right. So thanks for the question. The references to, this is just crazy. So the state in the United States that has the most nuclear is Illinois. And up until recently, it actually had a ban on nuclear. It was illegal to build a nuclear reactor in the state of Illinois.
Which is roughly like California, right?
Yeah. But I mean, they have 11 Anyway. So the movement to lift the ban failed in the first instance. The legislature passed a bill to lift the ban, the governor vetoed it. And that caused a whole big reaction, as you could imagine, with the labor community. So they went back to the drawing board and they came up with a different bill to lift the ban, but only for reactors that are 300 megawatts or less.
They were trying to be helpful.
They're trying to be helpful. So now you could put, 4 300 megawatt SMRs next to each other and you wouldn't be violating the ban. So it's kind of a, it's
that kind of shows the changes in industry, even since I've been involved. Like, it was so unpopular that the sales pitch is we need to create new reactors that are safer. The old ones are bad, and the smaller ones are always better. And I know nobody, even the small reactors developers in this room, would agree with that, right? Like, it's changed over time, the acceptance of these things. And when that gets into a law, it can be pretty problematic, right?
Yeah. But I think the good news is that the governor and the legislature and a whole bunch of folks in Illinois are focusing on this issue right now. And I imagine that there will be some effort that we will support that will address that limitation. Because obviously what you want is you want to have the technology that is least cost, able to be built safely and quickly, and an arbitrary size limit doesn't really relate to either of those two things. So I am hopeful that that will get fixed.
Shout out to less regulation that we saw from the Texas plan this morning. They didn't specify reactor type or size. You try to set the goal and let the market fill in with the necessary steps. Another thing I saw out of the plan is that it has support for early site development, which is the really expensive, difficult thing that's very hard to justify. So hopefully that helps a project get going.
Yeah, and there's also some federal support for early site permit. The same week that the X-Energy announcement came out, the Kairos announcement came out, DOE announced $2.7 billion in HALU funding and $900 million in grants for early site permits. So October 15th was a big nuclear week at the DOE, and
But that one is limited to technology types, right? The 900 million.
that's for light water reactors. Yes,
Right.
that's right.
Advanced, but
They had already
they
done-
say SMR in it. I guess I didn't get to the bottom of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So in summary, you're building 12 new plants tomorrow, right?
Charles.
Just joking, media. Don't report that. Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you.